Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whiskey Podcast. I'm joined today, and I'm joined as always by my good friend, my business partner, the dear, the sweet, the wonderful, the generous, the omniscient. I don't think you're omniscient, but you are Jason Johnston Yellen. But here's something that's different, Jason. I am looking you in the eye. In the same room, in the same hotel room.
And Jason. I'm looking at the wall while you were looking me in the eye.
And I'm just trying to make you uncomfortable by capturing your
too
attention.
Intense. Dial it down. It down.
Look at me.
Call me by your name.
Look at me. Proclaim my moniker.
Yeah, hello from Philadelphia.
Hello from Philadelphia. How are you, sir?
I've been watching a lot of...
Go easy. Choose your words.
The John Mulaney, Nick Kroll characters on Broadway with
I thought you were going to go with what's the show that I love? What's the show that I love that has them in there?
Game of Thrones.
They're cartoon characters.
Oh, Middle Earth.
Big Mouth. Big Mouth. So what is this Nick Kroll, John Mulaney Broadway thing?
Yeah, they play a couple of older gents.
All right.
Who are theater buffs in New York City. It's wonderful.
How do I not know about this? I love the two of them.
I think it's actually called Oh Hello from Broadway. I think that's their show.
Oh, I bet you Haida knows about it. I bet you she does.
Well, it's worth checking out. Can I give a plug? Unpaid, of course.
All right, yes,
the
please.
only way we do things
unpaid,
around here.
Yep, plug away.
We had a lovely round of drinks and dinner at Monk's Cafe in downtown Philadelphia.
Monk's Cafe was a cafe that you and I had heard both John Hansel from the Whiskey Advocate.
Go on. I thought you were going to say a different John. Carry on.
I would even go as far back as to say John Hansel from Malt Advocate talk about this. And then also Lou Bryson talk about Monk's Cafe for a while. What's the John I'm missing?
And
Mulaney.
Also...
John...
Single letter.
John Quincy Adams.
Oh, you had the right syllable.
John Q?
Oh, you just missed it.
John L.
John K.
Oh, John K.
Sorry, John.
John K, yeah,
Sorry, John.
of course.
I apologize for Joshua at this moment.
Listen.
We had a lot of Monk's Cafe,
We had a lot of Monk's Cafe.
A lot of Monk's Cafe.
And we had cask samples to go through before that.
We did a lot of business. And then we did a lot of Monk's Cafe. And then we did a lot more business.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And yeah. Talking about business.
Are we still plugging?
No.
We're done plugging. We talk about Monk's. We talk about John K.
The listeners don't know this, but you do.
Oh, I'm scared now.
In the last episode, we talked about catching up with a few emails.
Yes.
And you delved as deep as February. But before we had started the recording, I was trying to find an email from December that I thought I had flagged in my inbox, and I had not. And I hadn't marked it as unread, and I just couldn't find it. Once we completed the last recording, I found the email saved as a PDF on my desktop. This is one step away from printing it.
It is what's so funny is like I could print this, but that would mean I'm old. And so therefore I'll just make a PDF of it.
Save the PDF to my desktop.
Pop it onto my desktop. I think that makes you even older than old.
But listen, the reason that I wanted us to talk about this email is because a lot of thought went into it. And it came to us on December 22nd. And to be honest, I'm deep into vacation at that point. I am not looking at emails. I'm not opening my inbox. December 22nd. But Trevor Wiki.
Oh, yeah. I know that name.
Took the time to send a very thoughtful email. And for the last 3 full months, I have felt terrible about not pivoting back to it. So I am pivoting back to it right now.
Do it. Trevor. Apologies for Jason. He printed this email.
To be fair, he sent it to the info account. So there's more than just
That's
Jason.
not an account that I observe, so it all falls on your shoulders.
It's not Christmas, motherfucker. It's Simadonna.
All right. Go easy.
So Trevor Wiki writes, and this came in December 22nd, 9:42 a.m. He got a good start on the day of December 22nd. And he opens up in the most perfect way. There's no salutation.
Yeah.
Just gets right to the meat of the matter.
Right in. No foreplay.
The first word is so.
Oh, that's so, comma, boom.
No comma.
Oh, no comma.
There's no time for commas.
He just goes right in.
Yeah.
All right, okay.
So Trevor writes.
Trevor, go ahead.
So I have given this some real thought. Period. That's the opening sentence. Do I have your attention?
So I've given this some thought. Period.
Yep.
Do I have your attention?
No. I'm saying to you, do I have your attention?
Oh, you've got my attention.
Okay.
Yes.
Back to Trevor. As I didn't get a lottery pick for the wild turkey selection, shots fired.
Yeah.
Shots fired right there.
Yep.
I hear you, Trevor. I see you. I see you over there sending an email. Since I didn't get blah, 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 blah. My favorite whiskey from Single Cask Nation.
We were asking people what their favorite whiskeys were. Yes, okay. For the final email of the year, the year in wrap. Got it. Okay. Yep.
He says, as I didn't get a lottery pick for the wild turkey selection, my favorite whiskey from Single Cask Nation, 1A.
1A, okay.
Was the VDC selection. Virginia
666.
Distillery Company.
Okay.
666. Yep. Delicious. Here is why. It is exceptional with your eye closed.
Oh, I like that.
And if someone put it in front of you to taste, it is a winner that you would assume was a Highland Scotch.
Huh.
And Trevor's not the first person to draw attention to this. This has been compared to Old School Macallan, Glenfarclas, some people Glendronach, like big, heavy, sherry, Highland Scotch
big
style. 1B was the Dalyuen.
The mistake?
Happy accident, sir. Happy accident. Trevor writes, it was so good. I have made my wife hide it from me so I can savor it.
Wow. That is so funny. I feel as if I've asked Haida to do that before. Like, can you just, keep this out of my line of sight?
Please put this somewhere where I'm not.
Yeah.
But the reason that I picked this is, yes, the opening paragraph is very complimentary of us, but I like it because he then goes on to talk about other bottles that are not ours.
Okay. Oh, that's nice.
So Trevor says, store bottle pick, a Kilchoman 8-year single barrel that was offered to our Wheaton Whiskey Club and was a Fred Minnick pick. I didn't know Fred was picking Kilchoman casks.
Yes, I seem to remember that. It was... I do remember that. Does he talk about the cask?
Nope. He says, super tasty, and I have 2 now.
I want to say that was a cask that was maybe from some weeder, from some weeded bourbon cask or something like that. Yeah, I could be wrong, but that's what my gut tells me.
Okay.
Yep.
Trevor continues. Best whiskey, and he puts E in parentheses.
Oh, boy.
Best whiskey at an organized dinner / tasting. Redbreast Lastau.
You were drinking that just the other day.
I just mentioned this an episode ago. It was paired with a creme brulee and was fantastic.
Checks out.
Isn't that fun? I think you'd made mention of this tonight at dinner, actually, that there's a breakaway Facebook group for Single Cask Nation that was talking. Who was the person who was just talking? Ian Bruce.
Ian Bruce, yeah.
Was just talking about the value of pairing whiskey with food.
With food, yeah.
And is it worth doing?
Yeah.
Does it detract? Does it amplify? Here's Trevor Wiki saying, I had a creme brulee with a red breastless style.
Totally checks out.
And it was a fantastic experience.
Yeah, totally checks out.
Absolutely. Checks boxes for me.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I told you over dinner, I accidentally created this Single Cast Nation Facebook chat group, and it's sort of taken on a life of its own. And it's been great to watch. And, you know, as an owner of the company, I sometimes question how much chiming in should I be doing? Like, is this for members only? Mm-hmm. You know, is it can an owner chime in? And I chime in every now and again, but I don't need to because Nation members are just having conversations, and it's kind of awesome. And it's so nice that this email from December is connected to this chat that we saw.
There you go.
On March 29. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's
very
good,
cool.
Good times. Good times.
Yep.
I currently have something in my eye which I'm grappling with, but
that's me. Sorry.
I wish you would stop poking me in the eye when I'm trying to talk to you.
Zip this back up. Sorry about that.
I'm trying to read an email over here on PDF.
Fucking PDF. Is that a portable document file or something that you got there?
I always thought it was portable document format. I could be wrong. I have no skin in this game. I just always thought the F was format.
Oh, I thought it was file. Anyway, yeah.
Maybe we're both right.
Yeah, why not?
Trevor writes, bottle kills that made me cry this year.
Ooh.
Cry is good, isn't it?
And by this year, he means last
2022.
year. Yeah, there you go.
No,
Sorry,
he meant 2022. We're just referencing it a few months late. Bottle kills that made me cry this year because they will be missed. The Port Charlotte 14. Now, I'm guessing he does not say here, but I'm guessing this is our Single Cast Nation.
I 100% guarantee he's
Port Charlotte 14.
Yes, he's got to be talking about that.
Trevor says, this is the bottle that made me learn about the nation. Oh, so there you go. There you go. There's the answer. And it was just languishing at my friend's house before I proposed a swap.
So his friend had it and just wasn't doing anything with it?
Trevor, follow up, please. What was the swap?
Yeah.
What did you give your friend?
Oh my gosh.
That freed the Port Charlotte 14 from their grasp? I'm very curious about that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So please, Trevor, follow up.
Please.
And I promise we will cover it much sooner.
But also feel free to take 3 months.
Take 3 months. We would still cover it in a future episode. These episodes are every 2 weeks. Like 3 months passes in the blink of an eye.
That's true too.
And then he says, last but not least, and this is in the category of bottle kills that made him cry. Last but not least, a Russell's Reserve single barrel private selection bottled in 2017. I wish I had more of that one as well.
Does he give any
None at all.
The store?
None at all. But if he's going to
Rickhouse?
follow up about what the swap was, give us more info on this 2017 Russell's Reserve single barrel.
Yeah. I'm curious if I own it. It'd be nice to revisit it. I've got so many different Russell's barrels.
I was going to say, is there anything you don't own?
Nothing.
Stitzel Weller just from Pappy.
Yeah, I drank all that.
He signs it. Sincerely, Trevor Wiki, P.S.
Oh, I like PS. Postscript.
Keep up the good work, and I am excited for next year's /2023's selections.
Well, that was awesome, Trevor, for writing in. Apologies that Jason is such a terrible human being. I love that we're pretending only one of us has access to the info account. That's a wrinkle I didn't see coming. I've been chastised.
I've
been chastised for even looking. I can't even mention that account. I can't even breathe in its direction.
Well, let me tell you that later in this episode, we will have 2 emails from the info account that we will be discussing.
All right. Okay.
And they came in very, very recently. March 25th and March 26th.
All right. Well, that's good that we have them, because I know that we really don't have much news to share
we'll
this
skip
episode.
right past that part, yep.
But
Although I will say having Jess on last episode to talk about the ROW was very well received. That was very exciting.
listeners aside, that was well received by me.
Oh, yeah.
I just really enjoyed having Jess on.
It was delightful.
You know, news aside, just, you know, reading emails and chitty-chatting, that was awesome.
Asking her what puke the worm means. That was real.
Fucking puke the worm. Did you, Jason, watch Poltergeist 2 since puke?
I've been busy. Real busy. I don't even think I've been home.
So what our viewers can't see right now, Jason is nosing and is about to take a sip from a little whiskey that I poured for him. And this whiskey was poured in honor of today's guest, who's David Thompson of Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery. And they've got a whiskey. The brand is called Filey Bay. It's kind of similar to us, right? We're J&J Spirits, but our brand is Single Cask Nation, right? So we have some Yorkshire single malt in our glass.
We've got so many Yorkshire friends.
Isn't that true? That's right. Jess is a Yorkshire person.
Yorkshire from Jess.
Ollie.
Yorkshire
Ollie
from
Chilton.
Ollie. Our good
David
friend.
Stirk.
David Stirk.
David Stirk's a Yorkshireman.
Our dear friends at Claxton's.
Yeah, they're all Yorkshiremen. Yorkshire folk.
Yorkshire folk. Now, like Yorkshire folk.
And this is kind of why, you know, it's interesting. When you look at the packaging on Filey Bay, it doesn't say English whiskey anywhere. Like I'm looking at this right here. It says Yorkshire single malt whiskey.
And David talks to this very point in the interview. It's tremendous.
But
God's own country.
It's God's country.
But I also like the way he talks about the land, he talks about the soil, he talks about the ways to grow grain and how grain grows in this particular part of Yorkshire.
Well, one of the things that I like about this conversation, and our listeners are about to hear it, is I think it actually fits really well with your conversation that you had with the Anmacht sisters. As well as our conversation with Matt Hoffman when he's talking about the commodity grain system.
May we add the last episode of Extra Extra?
Yeah. What was the last episode of Extra? Oh, that was the climate and just, you know, green initiatives and yeah, there you go.
Right. How are we growing the grain that goes into this spirit that we all love? How are we distilling this spirit that we all love?
Yeah.
I was going to say this to the listener. This interview, just like Trevor's email, comes from a couple of months ago. And we interviewed David shortly after we'd spoken with Susanna Skyver-Barton.
Correct.
And we were endeavoring to have a particular set of conversations in 2023. Now that we're actually getting to the David Thompson episode, we have been having the types of conversations that we talked with him about wanting to have and with Susanna about wanting to have.
Yeah.
That's been happening now. As we said in the last episode, was it Dan Greison's email? Those are on wax. Those have happened, right? Those are in cyberspace. We have released those episodes where we're having this consistent conversation about how distilleries are doing what they do. The spirit is hugely important. The quality of the spirit is hugely important. But how it gets from field to bottle is also hugely important. And David was totally up for that conversation.
David was 100% up for that conversation. And it's your final goal is to create the best spirit that you can. and how do you treat your farm, your local community, the world, period, in the best way you can, conscientiously, while creating the best spirit you can?
Well, and the thing that I would want to signpost for the listener before we go over to this interview is David talks about being in university in the 1980s. Mm-hmm. What was important then? What was valued then?
Yep.
What did one look at as a success story then? And he's savvy enough to know and to understand that criteria has changed in the last 40 years.
Yeah.
And the conversations he's having in the 2020s are different than what he was taught in the 1980s. And he is here for it. He is all over that changing conversation.
Yeah.
And I had a blast talking to him.
Oh, I thought it was fantastic.
It was so exciting getting into these. And again, we've done it a fair few times since we originally spoke to David. But getting into the nuances of agriculture, the nuances of growing, the nuances of fertilizer. Like for two whiskey geeks to be sitting talking about fertilizer for fields of barley, like, I'm so proud of us.
But I think, my hope is that people in other fields are having similar conversations. If there are two jamokes with a wine podcast, I hope they're talking to wine producers that are discussing their vines and discussing the care of their soil and all this stuff, right? It's like yes, I agree with you. I'm proud of us from the standpoint of we're going beyond the questions of whiskey and more to the origins of whiskey. But really, isn't that what we should be doing anyway?
100%.
So,
100%. Yep. Well said. I'm excited to re-listen to this interview and re-familiarize myself with the important points made by David Thompson from Spirit of Yorkshire while I sip on this Filey Bay that you poured.
Cheers to that.
Cheers.
David Thompson, thank you so much for joining us on One Nation Under Whiskey. We're happy to have you here.
Absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you.
There are so many things that I want to talk about. Obviously, the distillery, Spirit of Yorkshire. Barley is a key thing that I want to discuss as well, but I don't think we can start the barley conversation properly without getting to know you a little bit and in your life with barley and with farming. So I wonder if you could just share a bit of your story with us and with the listeners that talks about your life on the farm and your education with barley.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's fair to start by saying my life doesn't revolve around barley.
Your middle name is Barleycorn?
It's not David Barleycorn, no. But clearly it's played quite a big part in my life. I suppose when I first started, I worked on a farm for 3 years. So it was a mixed farm, and then we're talking when I was sort of 16, 17, looking for a job to do. And my sort of love of farming came from that, really. And it was hard work. I got all the rubbish jobs. I had to go and dust out all the grain bins and clean all the cobwebs away for the harvest and things like that. And I never got to drive the tractors or the combine. so you had to cut your teeth, really, at the dusty end of farming. And But I stuck at it, and I really enjoyed those 3 years, and that gave me sort of the insight into agriculture at grassroots level. if that's not a pun. And
we'll take it
from
if it
that,
is. That's
much appreciated.
it's quite a good pun, actually. I might keep that one. So yeah, I loved it that much that I decided I would go and study it at college, and went to Nottingham Agricultural College. Mm-hmm. And I studied actually agricultural merchanting, or marketing if you like, which was effectively not directly farming as such, but actually dealing with farmers, helping them grow their crops, helping them produce the best products they possibly could. And that's not just barley, it was wheat, it was oilseed rape, it was lots of different crops. I also had a little bit of animal husbandry as well, which was always quite interesting. So, if you like, I had 3 years of learning the business behind agriculture, crop science, crop management. And then eventually, after 3 years, I worked for a grain merchant who actually it's called Cargill, so they're actually a very, very big merchant in America, and we were opening the market for Cargill in the UK, and there was 4 of us. So I sort of started in my area, which was the Yorkshire Wolds, which we'll go on to in more depth why that's such a good malting barley area. But effectively, I was helping farmers grow crops and grow particularly malting barley to the best of their ability, really.
Interesting. There was a term you used before. Was it crop science?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit? And the reason that I asked this question, when we had you on the Impex Beverages conversation about barley, it was an hour-and-a-half conversation, and right around 1 hour 25, I realized all of the barley questions I had for you were the wrong barley questions. I was really coming at it from a whiskey drinker's perspective and what barley does for whiskey, and not necessarily from an agricultural perspective. So I wonder if you could just dive into that a little bit in crop science.
Yeah, I mean, crop science. It's not just about the crop. It's about the land, the soil, the dirt, I think you call it in America. And we're in a very tricky place at the moment in agriculture, where the soil health has been eroded over years of heavy inputs, looking for big volumes of production following the wars, and that's damaged the soil, and we've got to turn that round. So part of crop science is not just about the physical growing of a crop, but it's looking after the soil structure, the health of the soil, because effectively if we don't do anything different than what we're doing today, we're going to end up with no soil to actually grow the malting barley in any way. So all sustainability starts with the soil. So one of our sort of, I suppose you call it crop science, it starts with the stuff you plant the crop in. And we've done a lot on the farm in the last sort of few years to make sure that we're doing the best possible things that sort of science knows about now to look after that soil for future generations. And again, we can go into a lot of detail about that as we go along the chat. But if you like, crop science, as I say, starts with the soil. It then goes on to the variety and the type of varietals you use for particularly malting barley, the areas you grow it, because not everybody can grow, not every piece of soil and every climate can grow malting barley. So that's part of the science of growing. Disease management, crop management, when you harvest it. So there's loads of stuff that goes into that overall concept of crop science, if you like. And if you don't get that bit right, you don't have beer, you don't have whiskey. So it's really, really important to get it right.
When I was over at the distillery, I think you had harvested your barley a few weeks prior, maybe a month prior. I don't remember the exact timing, but I do recall you had just sort of other things growing at the time that would grow and then die and put certain nutrients back into the soil. And so I guess my question is, if the tradition of every 7th year you let the field go fallow, and when you're out of season, you let other things grow to help put nutrients back into the soil. Despite that, you're saying that soil is still starting to erode and go away. Are there experiments, potential solutions, ways to rethink this to save the soil?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is cultivation. So you call it tilling in America, but effectively, the more times you physically move that soil around, you're breaking the structure of it. So there's a big move towards no-till or min-till cropping now. So if you think about it, what you would do with a normal crop is you would plough the soil from the previous crop, you would turn it right over, you would then cultivate the top or till the top of it to make a nice fine seed bed. You would then plant your seed, you'd wait it to grow, and then repeat it the following year. So literally you're moving that soil around an awful lot, and the mycorrhizomes, which are basically the fungi that lives in that soil, are pretty much destroyed every time you do that. And they're an incredibly important part of that soil health. And again, you could go on into detail with that, but we won't, because that would be just too far. But fundamentally, the more times you touch that soil and move it, it's damaging the structure of it. It's also, and this is one of the most important things as well, is it's releasing carbon to the atmosphere. So, the soil actually holds more carbon than every green plant in the world. It's twice as much carbon as all the green plants in the world. So you move it, you turn it over, the carbon's off to the atmosphere. So, we could do a lot about the carbon footprint by adopting these sorts of no-till or minimal-till farming techniques. And it would be more effective actually than planting trees. So this is the sort of crop science. It's not just about the plant, it's about the soil and how we look after it. So what you alluded to then when you're walking in our fields, where we've got now we're growing spring crops, and by that I mean we sow them in spring. So if you sow them in spring, 5-6 months later you harvest them in the autumn, you have this fallow time or time where there's nothing growing in the ground. And you don't really want brown fields, you want green fields for carbon capture and so on. So we plant a cover crop, which is made up of different types of plants which collect carbon from the atmosphere, but they also add natural nitrogen, like clovers, to the soil. And they're keeping naturally that soil healthy until we plant it again in the spring. So that is a move perhaps backwards to how they used to do it years and years and years ago, but actually is exceptionally good for that soil health. So these are the sorts of things being true field-to-bottle producers of whiskey we can do, because that's the starting place for us, is planting that seed and looking after the soil.
Gotcha.
To additionally frame here, given you going to crop science as a younger man and now being here going through this journey, what, if we think about the rise of artificial fertilizers and the yield that came from that, and it made so much sense to farmers who, since time began, have had difficulty making ends meet. It seemed like, a promise of the future, and yet we were wrecking the soil for the future. What did your education look like then, and what kind of journey did you take, realizing we're putting the soil into the atmosphere?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely right. When I was there in 85, 6, at college, they were teaching us how to farm intensively. Heavy inputs of nitrogen, artificial fertilizers, agrochemicals, all sorts of things. And that was what we did in the 80s. But the realization of talking to Tom, my business partner, who is actually the farmer, about how that was affecting the soil and for future generations was really the starting place of us looking into how we could turn this round. A lot of this sort of artificial inputs, if you like, came from, again, the fact that we had factories making bombs, and after we stopped making bombs, we started making nitrogen fertilizers. Somebody put that onto the field and realized it increased yield, but also what it does, it tends to make that crop more disease susceptible, because it's almost forcing it to grow too quickly and too heavily. So then you've got to put more agrochemicals on, and it was one of these sort of compounding problems that we saw, and we thought there's got to be a different way. There's got to be a different solution to this. So it doesn't. I mean, when we changed the way we did it, in fact, without very low inputs and no tilling, we did see quite a drop in yield. But as the soil health improved, that drop in yield reduced and reduced and reduced. And now we're in year 5. We're almost pretty much back to where we were, without the artificial inputs. Yeah. So I suppose that was the realization. I think you have to go through the learning curve of, this is what we do. It's not quite right. How are we going to find a different way of doing it? And that takes decades. So in our experience, but at least we're doing that now, and I think it's very positive that we're doing it, not just for whiskey but also for farming in general, and the planet.
I'm trying to ask a careful follow-up question. When we kicked off 2023 talking to Susanna Skyver-Barton, and one of the things she had talked about expecting to hear more of in 2023 is distilleries talking more about the environment, and in a meaningful way, not just in a marketing shortcut where consumers roll the eyes. And one of the things that we talked about was, those of us who are for the environment, which you would expect to be all of us, but it's not, there's almost a politicalization there, where we sometimes tread lightly. And, traditionally farmers have been of a much more conservative bent and a conservative leaning. And I'm curious, as you're starting to tell this story of coming out of intensive farming, yield going down, but yield then going back up, and promoting healthy soil, are you getting some ears pointed in your direction? Like, what's the, again, my turn for the pun, what's the lay of the land in the UK right now around this type of farming?
Well, I think more people are tending to look at it, and the reason why is because farmers will grow the crop that is going to make them the most money. They're business people. It's going to happen. The problem with that is when it was artificially supported, so if there was a subsidy on a particular crop, they would grow that, and they'd grow it intensively. And then, so it tends to be government-led, but a lot of, certainly in the UK now, there's a lot of subsidies coming away from the crops you're growing. And this allows you, perhaps, there's more help in terms of turning the corner into how to regenerate soil, how to regenerate the farm, and how to look after things. So I think the emphasis is shifting anyway, and that's great. But as long as something is subsidised and artificially, then you'll always get a section of society and farming who will grow that crop purely because it makes them more money. But I think there's definitely a move in the States now as well. I mean, it's huge where not just growing one crop, but growing many different crops and different varieties, and having a mixed sort of farm is going away from the intensive nature of growing. And I think there's quite a few. Was it called Kiss the Ground or Kiss the Earth?
It is.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, you need to watch that, Joshua. It was a fantastic documentary about how people are changing the way that they farm and how they think about the soil. And it's really, really good.
Yeah, the first one. So I used to teach philosophy, and I taught a food ethics course. And one of the first movies we would show in there is My Father's Garden, which was an educated college guy who'd left the family farm, gone off and done his thing, returned to the farm and had said, look at our soil. We're trying to grow crops in concrete. This is a disaster. And he started an organic movement within his farm and started to get ears turning towards him as success was shown. And Absolutely fantastic. Polyface Farm, which is very well known as well, is just down the road from me, only about maybe 40 minutes from my house. And they have got practices in place. So there are, it's a big fight in the US. The monoliths are tens of billions of dollars of profit a year on monoculture. And it's hard to shake that. But there's a call from consumers over organic. And again, back to the point we're making with Susanna, I think it's too easy for organic to be a shortcut, and an organic through the USDA here in the US doesn't necessarily mean what you think organic might mean. It can be a percentage of organic, or it can be field adjacent to organic. It can mean many different things, and the consumer's busy and doesn't have, expendable income to waste and is being very careful, judicious with their money. So it's how do we educate? How do we present it? What role does the government play in that? So I love hearing you talking about this, David.
I think going on, Josh, what you said also is the other thing we're getting within the industry is what I call greenwashing. So people
100%.
saying the right thing because it's the right thing to say. But when you look behind the scenes, it doesn't actually hold a lot of water. And we have in this country, everybody says, right, let's sponsor plant a tree campaign. For every bottle you buy, we're going to plant a tree. Now, in its own right, that doesn't sound bad, but trees take hundreds of years to grow and actually do the job that we are doing with the soil now. So there are, yes, it's a good thing, but it's also, there are better things. And it's not just the answer. And I think when I see that sort of thing on a website, I'm thinking, okay, you really haven't looked into what else you can do, guys. Yeah. That's a great greenwash. It sounds great, but behind the scenes, is it really happening? And what's going on here? So, we've got to be careful, because I think at the end of the day, everything helps, but sometimes there are better things that would help quicker.
Yeah, I think the kids call that virtue signaling.
Okay. Yeah.
For once, you might actually be right about what the kids say.
Hey, I wanted to go back really quickly, just to something that you had said, and I promise we will get to the wolds and we will get to the distillery and the whiskey, which I'm going to pour a little bit once we do get to the whiskey. But you had said something that I just wanted a bit of clarification on. And you had talked about farming malting barley, which makes it sound as if there's also farming for barley you don't malt. And so I wonder if you could talk about the differences there and why there's why you're delineating the two.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're absolutely right. That there are varieties that are recognised for their malting qualities. And they're recognised for malting qualities through the ease of malting and malt yield, but also the disease resistance and so on. But the main thing for the maltsters is they get a product which is uniform and will malt successfully and produce the best quality malt you can. So we have probably a list of 3 or 4 varieties that suit our particular land type, which the maltsters will actively buy. There are feed varieties which are just grown purely to feed animals, and these varieties are definitely all about yield. They're not particularly all about germination, which is a really important part of making malt. It's got to grow again. So that fundamentally is a difference. You also tend to get winter barleys grown. Feed barley is grown in the winter. So they're planted in the autumn, they grow through the winter, and then they're harvested in the normal sort of time in the summer. Whereas now we seem to be seeing a lot of spring-sown malting barleys. So again, when you plant them, it's different as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there was a period of time, and Jason, correct me on the dates if I get them wrong, but I feel as if sometime in the early aughts, there were some distilleries that would highlight particular barley strains, but then they would highlight summer barley, winter barley. And from a malting perspective, are we looking at different varieties, or are we looking at what the what that growth season does to those varieties? How do those differ?
Yeah, winter varieties are grown, obviously, as I say, sown in the autumn, and they have to go through a period of very cold, we call it vernalization, to make the seed germinate. And those varieties tend to be needing that cold period, whereas the spring varieties have been grown or bred specifically not to need that requirement. So the advantage, I suppose, of winter sowing is you get a really quick establishment, and then it sits there through winter and it's off in the spring, whereas you really do need to hit the ground running in the spring if you're planting in the spring. So it depends on your soil type, it depends on where you are, but fundamentally the varieties now we grow for malting are spring sown, and they've improved dramatically over the last sort of 10, 15 years. So yes, it really depends what you're trying to create at the end, I suppose.
Okay.
So the other evolution that we've lived through is many distillers talking about yield and litres of alcohol from a ton of grain, and somewhere around 400 litres of alcohol being a kind of a good number. If you got 410, you were up. If you were 390, you were down. And on you jolly well win. We've also heard, and through that it was yield driven. And as some distillers have evolved, we've heard about, flavours. But it's so interesting, we occasionally lead Whiskey Geek tours of Scotland, and you take a geek to a distillery, they want to talk about barley, they want to talk about flavour. And invariably the response would be, oh no, it's just yield, it's just a raw ingredient that provides sugar that we then ferment. Did you ever believe that? Your experience of that in helping people grow malting barley, was it just yield driven, or were some people asking about flavour?
Nobody asked about flavour.
Well, thank you, sir.
No, I mean, basically, if you're in the farmer's boots, he's interested in growing a heavy crop to send to the malting factory. But that's no good if it doesn't malt. So you have to hit certain parameters other than just yield. You have to hit parameters of nitrogen content. The high nitrogen content barleys, if you've got more nitrogen, you've got less sugar. So you need as much sugar in that barley as possible to make as much malt as possible, to make as much alcohol as possible. So you have to be able to grow low nitrogen barleys, and then you'd get a premium, and the maltster would pay you a premium. In terms of flavour, varieties of barley have never ever been grown for flavour. Lots of other things, yield, disease resistance, how tall they are, how resistant they are to drought, all these sorts of things, but never ever flavour. And there is obviously this, dare I say, terroir movement in barley, and in our experience, the terroir, I understand with wine, because you've got a plant in the ground for hundreds of years, and it's sort of part of that ground. Barley's in the ground for 5 months. Now, how much flavour or terroir is going to have an influence on flavour? It'll have an influence on yield and quality, but flavour is a different thing. If you think about barley, it goes through harvest, it goes through drying, it goes through being wet, it goes through growing, malting, roasting, mashing, fermenting, distilling, putting into a cask. All of those other things have got massive influence on flavour, but not the sort of seed that comes out of the ground, in our view. So we take a slightly different view of life on that one. But that comes from years and years of growing malting barley on the farm. So, you can take it or leave it. But no, I think flavour's choice driven. It's your process driven. It's how you process. We're not all about yield of LPA, litres of pure alcohol. We're about making sure that spirit has wholesome flavour, the flavour style that we want from our distillery, which is light, fruity, ester-led. So choice of yeast varieties, and all of these sorts of things go into how you make a flavoursome whiskey. Not how you grow your barley.
Do you allow that it might have more influence with beer, or do you think the same holds true with beer production? And I'm asking a proud Yorkshireman about beer.
That's a really great question, because everybody says this is Marisotta beer, and it has a distinct flavour. And actually, I think you're probably right. You'll probably be able to tell a different sort of flavour from the beer because it's gone through less process. You know, you haven't gone through the same sorts of process you go through with whiskey. So I think to an element, yes, you're going to pick up some sort of nuances from the variety.
Yeah.
But that also could be influenced by the way that they mash and how they grind the grist, right? And all sorts of things. Yeah. So yeah, it's a bit of a difficult one. There's no one answer. There's no one right answer. That's the thing. Yeah.
Well, and it is interesting talking to historical brewers and how many talk about the water, and really the water was the foundational component to their brew, and how that created regionality in brewing styles. Yeah. And one of the things Joshua and I have kind of discussed this at length on the podcast and off is this terroir, right? And I like the way you couched it, but I think Dave Broom, in a sense of place, kind of plays with what Josh and I have talked about on the podcast, which is you can talk about a sense of place. You can talk about a physical distillery. You can talk about physical stills. You can talk about process that happens at that place. And if you were able to lift up whole cloth that distillery and take it to another part of the world, we don't think you would replicate that distilled spirit in that part of the world.
I'd agree.
So there might be something to say about place, but I think it is multifaceted. And I think terroir might lead us to a conclusion that we're not trying to make, or it might sound like an argument that we're not trying to make. But I think we are trying to communicate place and process. Do you think that sounds fair?
Agree. Totally agree, and the people involved. That the people are so important as well. So place is everything that goes into the growing, the mashing, everything all the way through the process, and the people involved, and obviously the climate, or in terms of maturation, massively important. So there are so many elements of what makes Filey Bay, or any other whiskey. So I think you're absolutely right. A sense of place is so important.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be all about one thing.
You're right. Yes.
Which I think brings us perfectly to one of the things I love about the Filey Bay bottles is it doesn't say single malt English whiskey. In fact, English isn't even on there. It's Yorkshire, which really is a sense of place. And you had talked earlier in the conversation about how the wolds, where you're farming, are just such a great place for growing barley, and they make for your great beers, which I'd love to talk about a little bit. And then, of course, your final product, the whiskies. So can you talk about the wolds and where you are, where the farm is, where the distillery and brewery are?
Yeah, sure. So it's a fourth generation barley farm on the wolds. The wolds, for people who don't know, are lovely chalk rolling hills. And they tend to be on the east coast of England, stretching from Yorkshire. They're also down into Lincolnshire, so there are some Lincolnshire wolds as well. And actually they end up somewhere out in the Cotswolds. So, these sorts of areas, Lincolnshire, Yorkshire, the Cotswolds, have some of the best malting barley land, by the fact that soil and is relatively unfertile. It's not particularly fertile land. Going back to what I said about you want to grow a barley that doesn't have a lot of nitrogen, if you try and grow barley on really fertile land, you will end up with a load of nitrogen. Therefore, less malt, less yield, and actually it won't go for malting anyway. So we're coming back to place, and terroir. Our terroir, in terms of the soil type, is absolutely perfect for growing low nitrogen, quality malting barley. Hence the fact there are several malting factories around us, because they're going to be close to where the majority of the malting barley is grown. So the place, if you like, I mean, we over the sort of 4 generations, if you like, have sent our malting barley up to Scotland to make their whiskey. So that was one of the sort of decision processes when we first made the beer and the whiskey was, why are we doing this? You know, we've got the water on the farm from a borehole, we've got the best malting barley probably in the UK, you know, and we should be keeping it and be proud of keeping it and make our own whiskey. And that's how Spirit of Yorkshire started and Filey Bay started.
But the brewery came first, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Was it? Did the brewery start with the distillery in mind, or was it, or had you not had that thought in your mind when building the brewery?
Yeah, well, the brewery came about because Tom was sitting on his wold farm, not making a great deal of money out of traditionally growing the crops he was growing. So, just bear with me. There's a phone ringing somewhere. I'm going to pick that one out. It's gone, I think. So yeah. So he said, "Well, what do I got? What do I got on this farm where I could add value? I've got my malting barley. I've got my water. So the logical step at that stage was beer. It was at the time when people were going into holiday cottages or making cheese out of the dairy herd, or they were doing different things to try and supplement their income. And for Tom, it was just, you know, we've got two of the main ingredients. All we now need is yeast and the know-how. So in 2003, Walt Top was born, and a very small sort of brewery, as they all start. And it grew and grew and grew to a point where they had to, I think they doubled in size 3 times. Wow. Just to keep up with demand. They also put a bottling line in, which was quite unusual at that time because it was quite a big investment. So you were bringing other people's beer in to use the facilities to bottle. So that business, if you like, started the process of using those raw materials on the farm. The next logical step was what else can we do? We've got beer, and the first starting place for making whiskey is beer. Obviously slightly different, you don't put hops in it and so on, but we had the infrastructure, if you like, to make a fantastic wash. So it seemed to us sensible to look at the process, but we didn't know how to do it. So that's when Jim Swan got involved with us and gave us his nuggets of wisdom to get us going in the right direction with the whiskey. Interestingly
enough, Jim Swan, working with you, he had a bit more freedom in working with you than he did with, say, Scottish distilleries who have to produce in a very specific way. Your setup, your distillation setup, I think that's, and please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as processes for creating whiskey are concerned, it's when your distillation starts, that's when things get a bit different compared to Scottish production. So I wonder if you could talk about your production and why Jim came up with this style of production, whether it came from him or it came from input from you and your team as well.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting conversation because if you look at what Jim's done, he has obviously worked with quite a few Scottish distilleries, but he's also very well known for working outside of Scotland. So, I mean, Cavalan, for example, completely different animal. He worked with the Cotswolds, he's worked with us, he's worked with Nick Neen, which is an up-and-coming organic producer. So he was the sort of guy who would come and say, this is how you make whiskey, but I'm quite open to suggestions and different ideas, and I'm willing to try. So the reason why we asked him the question about, I think you're alluding to the fact we've got a 4-plate rectifying column as well as our traditional pot stills.
Yeah. Yep.
We originally put that in because we didn't want to make gin, because whiskey distillation will not make a neutral grain spirit, so it won't make a 96% ethanol product where all gin starts. Yeah. And if we are going to be filled to bottle producers, the last thing we were going to do was buy NGS in. So what we did want to do was try and sell a slightly less mature product before it became whiskey. To do that, you need the stills to work harder to take out the sort of elements of harshness that maybe the cask would do in its first few years. So that was the template. That's what we said to Jim. Is it possible to be able to make almost like a halfway between a typical 74% new make and 96% neutral grain. And he said, well, I don't know, we'll try it. If you put more copper contact in there, it's going to definitely have an effect, but I don't know what effect. But he was a sort of guy who took that on as a challenge, let's see what we can do. And actually our hands weren't tied, Joshua, as you rightly say, by the fact we're not in Scotland. So the SWA, we want to respect that tradition of how to make it, but we also want to just twist it a little bit. So that's how it came about. And so we do indeed have this 4-plate rectifying column, which actually gives our Filey Bay character, that light, fruity distillate. We didn't actually sell any white spirit after doing all of that. we realised that actually it was just doing something really fantastic in its own right with the maturation, and perhaps in year 3 we were probably further ahead because of that, but it still had to be good before we sold it. It had to be the right, gone through its natural process before we actually sold it. So we put it in for all the best reasons, but actually it turned out to be completely different, and we kept beyond the 3 years until it was whiskey proper before we sold it. And so that's how it happened, really. It was a bit by chance, but also by the fact we wanted to experiment a little bit.
But you're running. I see Jason's. He has a question percolating, but let me ask one question before you get there. You're running 2 different kinds of spirit, right? Because you're not constantly running that 4-plate still. You're doing pot still, double pot, and then a proportion of that. Can you talk about the percentages of the 2 different spirit styles and how that comes together?
Yeah, it's very straightforward. We run the 2 pots, traditional 4-size pot stills, for 6 months of the year, and this makes the more traditional, sort of more oily distillate or new make. We cask that, and it goes away into the store and is separate. We then turn on the rectifying column, so you're still using your 2 pots, but out of the spirit still, it just goes through a little bit more extra copper, 4-plate column, which gives a lighter, fruitier sort of distillate. That's cast and is separate. And what that does then is gives us choice. So in the warehouse, we don't just have choice of cask or age, we have choice of style. And we can bring those back in different proportions depending on what we're trying to create. So for example, flagship tends to be 50-50 pot and column, and it gives you that light, fruity sort of element, something that doesn't have a great deal of cask influence. Whereas if we go to a heavy cask, we tend to use more pot-based new make.
Interesting.
So it just gives us options. It gives us choice of which way we go with that sort of, which is quite unusual. There's not many people who have that type of division in the warehouse.
And I'm sorry, Jason. And did that?
He's not sorry.
Not really. Did that direction come from Jim Swan, or did that come from? Because in the end, I think you're talking a bit about blending and conscious decisions of what cask to put that spirit in. Was that a Jim Swan thing, or did that come from an outside, from someone else?
It was sort of a Jim Swan thing, but you must bear in mind that Jim was here for our first 2 distillations before we lost him. So through the process of build, fermentation, getting the cask policy correct, getting the maturation policy correct, but these were policies. He wasn't there long enough to sort of say, guys, you need to be doing this, this, and this after you've distilled. So really, what happened was, I suppose, one thing I've got a black book full of Jim's comments and his advice. Because when Jim opened his mouth, the amount of information that came out, you could only capture sort of 15% of it. He's an incredible bloke. But the important thing was that he said to me was that get your balance of casks right. So for him, if you're going down the finishing route, which we can talk about what we mean by finishing, but if you're going down that route, then the biggest proportion of your casks need to be bourbon, and then you're going to finish in a second cask, which we have. But also, sort of 15 to 20% of our casks are first fill sherry or port or all the other casks as well. So we do have that as well. but the majority is first fill bourbon, which lends itself more to the lighter spirit. So, it seemed to almost organically develop through the knowledge of Jim and my little book and trial and error, really.
Okay. Jason, I will step back now.
So 2 of my questions have been answered along the way, which was, in one hand, I was trying to get the column still straight in my mind, whether it was standalone, whether it was on a pot, a la our friends up at Catoctin Creek here who have a pot with a column on top of it. So it's standalone.
Yeah.
Question was light spirit, looking to get it out a bit younger. What kind of cask were you finding? Worked there. Fresh bourbon, we're now learning there. So given that I haven't been to the distillery, I feel like I'm kind of more in line with our listeners here, where I'm going to ask the geeky question, which is, what kind of dimensions are we talking on your pot stills heights? What kind of height are we talking on your column still? And then I've got a follow-up to that.
Okay, so the wash still is 10,000 litres, so that's all based around a ton, mash tun.
Yep.
So a ton of barley, if you like. So that produces around about 2.5 to 2,800 litres of low wines. That goes into a 3,500 litre spirit still. These are 4-size stills. They're very traditional shape. We were very lucky to get them because the waiting list for 4-size stills is just ridiculous. But we always knew that they were the sort of, if you like, the Rolls Royce of stills and the ones that we really, really wanted. So in terms of height, not particularly tall because the building we're in isn't particularly tall. And the line arm is tends to be a traditional sort of, I suppose, a 15-degree sort of downward angle, which again is lending to a more of a lighter, more refluxy types of angle. So that, if you like, is the picture you would have in your head if you were looking at Spirit of Yorkshire. And then you would have this sort of 4-plate rectifying column, which does stand on its own, but is linked to the line arm of the spirit still, which has got a valve in it. So we can just divert, so it doesn't go into the condenser, it goes through the 4-plate rectifying column, and if spirit is working harder, it's going to be more ABV, it's going to be lighter, it's going to have to work to get through that copper, and then it goes into the condenser. So so really, yeah, it's very traditional in terms of, if you looked at it and then you'd out of the corner of your eye, you'd see this 4-plate rectifying column and you go, what the hell's that? But yeah, it's fun because it just gives us those options. And actually, when I walk into the still house on the morning and I don't know we've swapped over, I can tell by the smell. I can tell by the aroma that we've run column, and it is incredibly noticeable, the difference. Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. What? Now I see Joshua, hold your tongue. Hold your tongue. Hold your tongue.
All right.
Hold your tongue. This is great role reversal in today's episode. I love it. So one of the things in listening to you, I keep hearing the word options. And it seems like you're really able to pivot in a number of different directions. And so in bringing everything together, a multiplicity of grains that are good for the soil, grains that might make some good whiskey. We're hearing rumblings of it in Scotland, and I'm curious for you, is rye on the horizon? Is that, because it makes so much sense for everything you've talked. Oh, 3 puns, boom! Is that something that you're part of? Because it makes so much sense for everything you're trying to achieve.
Just to say to all your listeners, we haven't been talking behind the scenes about this at all, have we?
No. I've never met this man in my life before, as they say on stage.
3 years ago, we grew a crop of rye.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. That's perfect for what you're doing.
Absolutely, and traditionally rye will be grown in this area, way back. So the actual varieties of rye are very, very hardy. They're quite relatively easy to grow. Horrible to distill and mash, but we if we're going to do it, we're going to do it from our own grain, obviously. So and also we're not going to use artificial enzyme. So we were always going to have a 51% rye, 49% malting barley mash bill. Even then, it was a challenge. The problem with rye, when you're actually mashing it, it effectively has no enzymes in it, and the enzymes are the thing that makes it liquid. So you're going to set like porridge. So if it's 100% rye with no artificial enzymes, it's just going to set in your mash tank like porridge. You get no extract, you'd get no worts coming off, you would get no fermentation, you'd get no whiskey. So for us, using traditional types of mash tun, which is a flat bottom, you're going to get this sort of setting process happening unless you've got a large proportion of malting barley. Even after saying that, the drawdown of the liquid is incredibly slow. It's quite difficult. It takes a long time. We got there in the end, but it's a hell of a challenge. What you tend to find is people use what they call mash presses, which basically is a big filter, and they just shove it through the filter and they get the works off that way. That's the way round. Traditionally, you wouldn't tend to use a mash tun with a flat bottom, because it just sets. So there's little things you can do, like you can put rice husks with the mash bill to keep it more sort of open and more fluid. But all of this is a massive learning curve, you know. But anyway, at the end of the day, we have brand new virgin oak casks, which really is what the way you go with rye, filled with our rye distillate, and that's going to be a super exciting release probably in the next couple of years.
Okay. Wow, that's so cool. Could you repeat the mash bill again? Because as soon as you talked about the enzymes, I started thinking about amylase. And is amylase the only go-to, or is amylase just the one that distillers have been using?
It tends to be the go-to one. But obviously that's naturally in malting barley. So that's
exactly
the beauty of using a mash bill that's 51 rye, so you can actually call it rye, 49 malting barley.
Perfect. Thank you.
For those, including myself, that don't necessarily know what amylase are, can you go into that a little further?
Yeah, I mean, they're enzymes. Enzymes are there to chop up sort of the long chain sort of carbohydrates, if you like, the stuff that makes it gloopy. And if you don't have those enzymes, it's not going to make it fluid.
Yep.
So yeah, it's like boiling porridge. It's just going to set unless you've got something that's going to chop them up, and that's basic science. But that's the way these enzymes work. Now, if you're making 100% rye, you have to have an artificial version of those enzymes if you're not using barley. And in the States, you can actually use liquid enzyme.
Yeah, yeah. The percentage I'd heard was to make a rye, if you didn't want to use the artificial enzyme, was 10% malted barley. And so it's interesting listening to you talking about, well, there's this journey you can go on with your percentage, and you'll see different results as you increase that. So to get to 49 makes sense. I like the 51 being the rye. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the rye was malted as well, which is quite interesting in its own right. So some was unmalted and some was malted. Yeah.
So here's a follow-up question on behalf of Joshua. So Joshua doesn't tend to be a fan of spirit from malted rye. He likes the unmalted rye. Would there potentially be a reason for that? Is there something happening to or with malted rye? Is it a change in distillation process to get there? Can you make any sense of the vagaries of Joshua Hatton? And if you can't, that's totally understandable. I've been trying for a dozen years. Yeah, I'm on this a dozen years, my friend. You've got 2 minutes.
This is probably an answer I don't have for you, I'm afraid, because we're waiting to see what the outcome of our rye is going to be. But basically, what you do when you're malting, you're changing long chain sugars into short chain sugars, which are more fermentable. So you're going to get more alcohol out of the fact it's being malted, basically, and also flavour. So how you malt it, whether it's a heavy malt and it's roasting it or not. So, for example, our malting barley, we predominantly use pale malt, which is very lightly heated at the end of the process. Whereas with some beers like stout, you get chocolate malt, which is heavily roasted.
Sure.
And all these things add flavours as well. So it's not just the type of grain, it's the way it's being malted. It's very important.
Yeah, that's why it's strange for me that the malted rye isn't sitting with Joshua, since it sounds like it would bring in more flavour and more alcohol. If you were just designing this in a spreadsheet, it would make sense.
I think if it's 100% malted rye, I'd agree with Joshua. I think it would be overpowering.
Thank
you.
I think
it Whereas if you've got your mixture of barley and rye, it tends to be less overpowering and softer. And I think that's the challenge with rye anyway. It tends to be either really earthy and spicy, or it can be softer and fruitier. And I think that's the way we're going.
And that's what I found with my own palate. There's 100% malted rye that's here in the U.S. that the flavor profile just simply does not work for my palate. There's whatever that flavor is, there's far too much of it, and I don't like it. But
is that the Hodlings?
It's the Hodlings, yeah.
Yeah. I have no issue naming it because I like it and you don't, and it's not your palate, and it is my palate.
And I've never had it, so I'm
okay, right? Well, yeah, we're not.
So you're Switzerland right now. But last year we did a collaboration with Backwoods Distilling out of Yakandanda, Australia, and that was a rye whiskey that had a proportion of malted rye, and there was a bit of chocolate malt going on in there,
which ours is,
yeah, and I really, really enjoyed it because that flavor component became a part and parcel of a larger picture. And so that's where I'm discovering I'm really enjoying malted rye when it's a smaller proportion of the overall flavor profile. Then
it doesn't overtake. It doesn't overtake everything else. Yeah,
it starts to shine. It could sort of boost other flavors. So.
Yeah, in a previous episode, we did a blind tasting of a Polish rye, and a malted rye at that, and it wasn't working for a host of reasons. I don't think the malting was necessarily the issue. But.
Yeah, I think it's a case of balance. That's the word you need to use. You need to balance what you're doing. If it's all one way, like malted rye 100% will be, then it'll only tick a box for a very small number of people.
That's great that you're growing and distilling the rye, though. That's lovely. Really.
Yeah, I love that. Can I ask, when I think of distilleries, single malt distilleries outside of Scotland, I often think of some of the potential difficulties that they could have. Right? If you look at the 140 whatever plus distilleries in Scotland that are producing malt, they have the luxury of a system in place that allows them to put malt in different places, whether it's independent bottlers or blenders or what have you. In England, you don't really have that. There really isn't an English blend. Correct me if I'm wrong. In Israel, you don't have that. In Taiwan, you don't have that. And so I wonder, do you find that as a potential problem? Or do you think England will come up with its own sort of system the way the Scots do? You know, you see distilleries popping up all over the place in Ireland. Is there another boom like that happening in England where there could be a system created to put your spirit in many places if ever need be? Is that even a consideration?
Oh, probably not, although... There is the English Whisky Guild, who are set up and we're part of, who are trying to... this is more quality-led, so we're trying to put the basic principles in place of what the SWA have done for Scotch. So this is what English is, you know, and a 3-year maturation and so on, and wood and oak and what have you. So all of these sorts of things are being put in place as we speak. That's gone to DEFRA, which is the government body who monitor all this. And if that gets signed off, we will have our own sort of, if you like, template of how you make whiskey and call it English.
Okay.
Or single malt and call it English. I think historically the whiskey market was obviously all blended, and it was a huge independent bottling sort of market out there, and that's what you did. You flew under the radar. You just produced your bulk liquid and you sent it off. obviously, as we went through the 70s, 80s, and people trying to work out how to sort of revive these sort of the problems the industry was going through, that's when the single malt thing came about, really. Is why are we sending this away? Why don't we market ourselves? Blah, blah, blah. So for us, I would say that would probably be going backwards. Because we've created our own identity, our own style, our own flavour profile, and that is what Filey Bay is all about.
Yeah.
After saying that, then independent bottlers, we have sold casks to independent bottlers, albeit obviously I think in one of them actually will be the first English bottling they've ever done. So we're breaking new ground in that way, and I think we've sold a couple of different independent bottlers, are very well known, which is super exciting for us because that gives us also credibility. The fact that these guys have chosen to bottle our spirit is like a feather in the cap for us.
Yeah.
So I don't think we'll ever go. And that'll be a massive market for us, but I think it's a really important sort of tick in the box that actually, yes, English whiskey is now being seen as something that is worthy of old, traditional, independent bottlers wanting to get involved with.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, I like that. You know, and everybody has a different view. You know, you talk to Anthony Wills at Kilhoman, and he says, nope, it's all for us. We're not giving it to independent bottlers. Meanwhile, we did do one Kilhoman 11 years ago. But I'm not counting.
We got him on a good day.
You must have done.
But I like that. I like that approach of, you know, an independent bottler, especially when you're working with them in collaboration, can be a nice little marketing arm for your brand and confirmation that it's something that you should be looking for.
Yeah, I'm proud of. Proud that they've selected some of our whiskey to put into their bottle and their brand, and you know, that for me is, I suppose, a slap on the back. You know, saying, guys, you're making good spirit, and we're pleased to put in our bottle. So, yeah, it makes sense to me.
Yeah, beauty. Hopefully, we can give you a slap on the back sometime in the not too distant future.
Well, let's see what happens.
Well, we've come this far, and time is obviously ticking, and you're a busy chap. But you know, we'd be remiss if we didn't frame, at the very least for our listener, what should they be looking for? You know, from Filey Bay, from Spirit of Yorkshire, what have you put out into the world? Before we all hit record, we were talking about world travels. So, you know, it's out there. What should our listeners be looking for around the world?
So I think with Filey Bay, the brand is Filey Bay. The reason it's called Filey Bay is because of the bay that we're sitting on. The distillery is about here. Well, it's exactly there. So this is the bay. This is Filey Bay. We felt that we wanted to call the whiskey after the area we're from and where we farm, hence the name Filey Bay. So physically, you're looking for a brand called Filey Bay. In terms of the actual product itself, you're looking for something that's really accessible to a lot of people. What we didn't want to do is make a whiskey that only a very few would appreciate. So Flagship, for example, is pretty much 100% bourbon matured, first fill bourbon matured. And that is the DNA of our distillery. It's very light, it's fruity, it's flavour-led, it's spirit-led, it's not cask-led. And I think a lot of young distilleries tend to make the mistake of overpowering their spirit with a very heavy cask with their first few releases.
Yeah.
What we wanted to do was say, this is us. You know, this is us. You can taste the spirit. You can taste what the DNA is. And I think that's what you get from Filey Bay, particularly the Flagship.
Yeah.
After that, we do a lot of finishing. So we take that base Flagship bourbon matured spirit, 3, 4, 5 years, and then put it into a second cask, which gives us our range of finishes. So our core range would be STR, which is the Jim Swan shaved, toasted and recharred Rioja casks. We use a Muscatel cask, which is quite unusual, quite sweet, quite fruity. But also we have our little quirks because of the brewing side. We also have a lot of beer. So we do a lot of beer-aged, cask-aged beer. And we also then refill those casks to do beer-finished whiskey. So we've got an IPA release finish that we released a couple of years ago. Super successful, probably one of the best products we've made, and we've got other beers that we're using at the moment, and we're maturing at the moment, which I won't divulge at this time until we're ready to go. But that is the collaboration with our brewing side and our beers and our whiskey finishing is super special to us. So again, that sort of opens a few doors to other people that perhaps haven't heard of us before.
Sure.
On top of that, we've got all the sort of lovely sort of single casks and special releases, so ones that may be made of 3 or 4 different types of casks. So we do a Yorkshire Day every year, which is our summer release, which is predominantly sherry-based. So there's lots going on, but if you want to sum it up, I would say accessible whiskey for most people would enjoy. So something light, fruity, easygoing, soft. Certainly beyond its years.
And a minimum strength with any of them? Do the different lines have different strengths?
So
Is it consistent?
pretty much we're 46 because we don't want a chill filter. We don't add any colour. So 46 is the base strength. The special releases tend to be in the 55s. And then obviously the single casks or whatever they are when they come out of the single cask. So, so that's we don't tend to get too complicated with strength. We just know what our spirit performs at a certain 46. It tends to be spot on. Funnily enough, in America we have done 48
I was
for
just
the American market, which is a nice little twist for the American market. And that was on the back of talking to Joshua and Sam. Just because we felt it just carried itself a little bit better in the States
fun.
market at that level. So we do a special for those guys.
It makes such a difference. It makes everything pop a little bit more, and there's something I think in the consumer's mind as well. They see that slightly different ABV, and it's what's that?
Yeah. And it's worked. The guys over there have done a great job, but that is part of it. It's part of making it special for the market you're in. And we can only take advice from you guys. You've been in the market long enough, but it works. It works really well in the States at that level.
Brilliant. So, all right. So now we have a lay of the land of from you to barley to brewing to distilling and maturation to what your line looks like. What does 2023 and the next few years look like? What has you? Besides rye, what has you excited going forward?
I think what makes me excited, I mean, the beauty of whiskey, as you know, the older it gets, the softer it gets. And we're seeing some absolutely superb casks now. And actually, I think one of the measurements of that is if you can pick a bourbon cask, a first fill bourbon cask, which you're happy to bottle as a single cask, I think it shouts so much about your spirit, because there's nowhere to hide with a bourbon cask, and we have some absolutely cracking single cask releases that we're going to do pure bourbon matured. So that's quite exciting. I think also that we quite like the idea of looking for casks that are away from the norm, and we've got a few things that we're working on at the moment, which are quite exciting. We'll also build on our core range. So obviously the STR and the Muscatel and the flagship are underpinning everything else. If they're not right, everything else isn't going to be right. So that's exciting. And then, picking little market gems. So little single casks that just tick the box for a particular market. We're always trying to look for something that's very exciting in the warehouse. And Joshua, you've been there, and sometimes you get an absolute gem, and that's the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning, is finding these gems, and then saying, right, well, that's great for that market, and so on. So it's expanding incredibly quickly. I think the challenges are still there. You can grow too quick, and you can end up trying to bottle stuff that you shouldn't be bottling.
Yes.
And I think we've got examples of that happening in the English market at the moment. I think people are running way too quick, and they're just supplying this hungry demand. And I think that will be at the detriment of quality. And I think for us, we're more organic with it. We're trying to just work away slowly. We haven't got any outside investment in the business. It's just us, so we have to work slower. But actually, I think that's the right thing for whiskey anyway. I think once you get these other financial pressures on you, you tend to your product tends to potentially lose its quality or its direction. Let's say.
Yeah, when you're focusing more on your shareholders than you are on the product going into the bottle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and that's not us. That is definitely not us. So we might not grow as quickly as some of the other English distilleries, but that's by choice.
Yeah, brilliant.
Well, there's nothing wrong with being known for quality.
I hope not.
This has been so special, David, so incredibly special. When Joshua was pitching you as a guest, and he'd said, this is going to be a fascinating hour. And it has been a fascinating hour. So thanks a million. I'm really excited for future conversations to see where you go, where the brand goes, and happy advanced birthday for later in the year for that big number if I don't see you before.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, guys. It's great getting involved with these sorts of things. There's one thing that distillers and owners of distilleries like this love, and it's talking about it. So, you make it very easy. So thank you very much, guys.
Cheers.
Awesome.
Pleasure.
Until next time, David.
Indeed. Huge thanks to David Thompson for taking the time to talk with us.
Absolutely, yeah.
I've spoken with him a few times on some of the Impex distillery deep dives that we've done, and we've had Jenny Meller, hopefully I pronounced her name correct there, as well. And she has she's a wealth of knowledge as well when it comes to barley and agriculture. And it was nice to have this one-on-one with David. And what's nice now is, Jason, after hearing about barley, after hearing about the barley they grow, that they turn into a beer to then be distilled into whiskey, to then go into first fill bourbon casks, I've poured for us the Filey Bay flagship, which
is delicious.
Yeah.
My comment to you while we were listening back to David's interview, my one-word comment was soft.
Yeah.
And I know we had a listener, and I apologize for forgetting the name, but I know we got a listener email asking, what does soft mean? And as I'm enjoying this Filey Bay flagship, and I'm thinking soft, it doesn't have the prickle of alcohol. It's coming in at 46.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you what you mean by that. Yeah. Because for my palate, this is bright, fruity, and engaging. So what do you mean by soft?
Soft is almost like stroking velvet.
Oh, I'm so glad you said velvet.
What else could begin with V? And it's just...
Velociraptors?
It's got a certain delicacy to it that I drink so much natural cask strength, and you and I, especially today, sample so many spirits direct from cask that we're often dealing with alcohol, and where does the alcohol reside? And in dealing with this, gosh, and this isn't to the detriment, if you told me this was 20% alcohol, I would believe you, right? It's that soft, it's that delicate, it's that easy across the palate.
You're talking to drinkability.
And there we go.
There
we go. Hashtag please drink the whole bottle responsibly.
Yeah, it's, for me, and I've visited this whiskey, and I've revisited this whiskey, and I've revisited this whiskey, because it is a slightly more delicate whiskey. It's interesting to taste it within different contexts.
Makes sense.
Right? So if you're like us and we wake and we do cast selections and your palate's quite bright and alert, then that's when this is a fruit bomb. Mm-hmm. It's just gorgeous and delectable. And Bikram Singh from Norfolk Wine and Spirits, that's what he talks about, right? It's the fruitiness of the Filey Bay. But tonight, I agree with you. It's softer. It's almost it's quite easy. I just watched you finish your glass. It's quite easy. It doesn't mean that it's simple.
No, it's not simple in the slightest.
It's not simple.
No. There's great grain presence from it. We talked in the last episode. We'll return to this in an email that we're about to cover here. We talked about that cereal note that can run through Irish whiskey from the unmalted barley.
Yeah, sure.
This definitely has a cereal note that runs across the palate, but it's not from unmalted barley. It's from nice, clean, crisp cereal barley. I can really get behind that. And if you can double check for me, I feel like there's a lot of bourbon maturation happening here.
Yeah, it's 100% bourbon.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry if I didn't. I thought I mentioned that, but
I'm tuning in and out of what you're saying.
Who, you, me?
Hey,
wow, this is what happens when we go to Monk's Cafe.
It's got that clean presence to it. And you were saying this a moment ago, the brightness, the fruitiness. For me, the cereal notes are all bright and alive and in your face. And there's no cask maturation getting in the way of that. There's only cask maturation heightening that.
I like everything you said. And I'm not even going to do a yes and.
That's what I was thinking.
I'm going to do a yes, and I have a question for you.
Oh, okay. That sounds like a yes and.
It is a yes and, but yes and question. Nosing this and tasting this.
From my empty glass, continue.
I'm going to pour you something really nice. More Filey Bay, by the way.
Okay. I like seeing you in person.
Isn't that nice?
I don't say that every day.
Go easy. I hope it's just for logistical purposes. Would you peg this as an English whiskey, as a Yorkshire whiskey?
No.
What would you peg it as anything? What would you peg it as?
Oh, it's a good question, but it's a loaded question based on the answer here. Listen, I think we've reached a point with world single malts that so many people are digging the single malt category that it's not a question of is that, and not that you said this, but it's not a question of is that as good as a Scotch or does that remind you of a Scotch region? It's much more just that's a good single malt. Yeah,
I was asking more. The question that I was asking is somewhat similar to a story that we've told many times. When we were at Cadenhead's warehouse and they poured us something blind.
Cadenhead's gone.
Yep. And I'd said, I don't think that this is Scotch whiskey. This is from another country, right?
Yeah.
It was a fantastic single malt. It ended up being a Paul John. My point is, as you nose and taste this, would you tie it to world whiskey? Would you maybe say, I wonder if this is a Scotch whiskey? Like, where do you think you'd go with that?
And that's where I was laughing earlier upon your first asking of this question, which was I could probably go lowland on this, lowland Scotch, or I could go for an unsherried Speyside.
Just wait until you taste the next Filey Bay. I'm going to have to ask you that question all over again.
And so the fact that David proudly says this is Yorkshire whiskey, I'm 100% there with him.
There you go.
Right? As we cover the world category and we name all of these countries, throw Yorkshire in there as well.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm totally on board with that. He's got no qualms with me. I just know that it was delicious, and you're asking me questions over my empty glass. what's next as we transition here?
So last September, and this is for Trevor Wiki.
I was going to say, so this is before Trevor Wiki sent us an email.
This is for his own edification. September 2022. I was with the Impex team, and we went out to the United Kingdom.
I've heard of it.
Hold on, I got to just open this.
And open it, he did. I see a UK duty tax stamp on the back of this.
While we were at the Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery.
Slight bore, thank you.
Do you need more?
I'll be coming back for more, don't you worry.
Trust me, I don't think you need more. They had in their distillery shop their 2022 Yorkshire Day bottling. So this is one of 1,500 bottles.
Okay.
55% alcohol.
Okay.
And oh geez, I don't have the. Do I have the canister?
Yeah, you just threw it on the bed over there.
Oh, I did. Look at that.
Apparently,
Jason.
someone else doesn't need any more.
Go easy. Oh, I think I just burped into the can.
Oh Lord, listeners, I do apologize on behalf of Joshua.
Oh man, it doesn't even say.
Who's been
Jason?
He's now just wandering around.
Well,
the room,
it's
talking to himself.
Oh, here we go.
He's found the answer.
Jason, go easy. It says only 1,500 bottles released. You know what? I'm gonna let you guess the cask types on this one. How's that? There's 2 cask types.
Okay.
Can you? Because I know Jess loves this. Can you explain the color? Can you describe the color of the whiskey to the listeners?
A dark corner of our hotel room here, but it's a pleasing darker amber. Depending on what it's put up against, it almost becomes a little sanguine.
I would argue that it's likely as dark as any Glenfarclas, Glendronach, Glenallachie, Tamdhu, Aberlour.
So the two is it 2 butts?
It doesn't.
It's 1,500. It's 1,500 bottles from bottles. 2 casks.
So no. It doesn't say 2 casks. It just explains the 2 different cask types.
Okay.
And it just says...
So there could be hoggies of this.
Jason, it's 3 cask types.
Hey, we got answers.
So it says X blank, X blank, and X blank casks. Here, I'm going to read this for our listeners. Yorkshire single malt whiskey. Only 1,500 bottles released from carefully selected X blank, and X blank casks.
Oh my gosh.
Specifically for Yorkshire Day 2022. Rich and spicy with flavors of dried fruits. Cinder toffee. You need to talk to me about that.
Okay.
Boiled sweets. You need to talk to me about that
That's
as
just
well.
hard candy.
Oh, just like boiled candy? Yeah, okay, got it.
Hard candy.
Hard candies, yeah. And orange zest. Natural color, non-chill filtered, 55% alcohol.
This is wild. Absolutely wild. I would drink this every day and twice on Sunday. It's got a gingerbread quality to it that makes me incredibly happy. And by that, I don't mean gingerbread as in gingerbread man cookies, either for those in America or those who are big fans of Shrek, the movie, or the musical, but gingerbread as in, so banana bread.
Yeah.
In the UK, we have gingerbread.
So it's like a soft...
Yeah. Yeah, really delicious, made with golden syrup. Like, really rich. Goes great with custard.
Oh, man.
One of my personal favorites.
Does your mom have a recipe?
You just keep my mom out of your mouth.
She gave me her recipe for her tatty scones.
She did indeed, and I told her, he's not in the family. I don't know why you're doing this.
I am now.
So let me ask you this first question. Yeah. Is there going to be a cask type here that I would never guess?
No, you would guess all of these cask types. I would argue that 2 of the cask types will be obvious. The 3rd cask type, may not be so obvious, but once I tell you what that is, unless you guess it before that, you would say, oh, yeah, okay, I can see that.
All right. So I would say PX, Oloroso, and Sauterne.
Okay, so you got the Oloroso right.
Okay. So there's no PX in this.
There's no PX, right? Given the richness of this.
Wow.
So, dear listeners, for flagship, you compared Filey Bay flagship to potentially a Lowlander or a bourbon cask Bay cider. Nosing this one, having tasted this one, if you were to put it within the context of Scotch whiskey, right? Because that's going to be your signpost. Those are signposts that people get. Where would you then put this?
Sherried Space Cider.
Sherried Space Cider.
I
Okay.
would even, and it could be more cask driven than spirit driven, but that spice from it, I could almost even make it a Western Highland sherried distillery.
Oh, I could see that.
So I wouldn't just need to keep it in Speyside.
Right, and so this is one of the things that I love so much about Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery. Now, I will be very honest with you in saying that I don't know exactly which spirit was in which cask, but they produce two different spirit types, which David talked about in the interview, where you're dealing with double distilled and then sometimes double distilled with a bit of column distillation for a lighter style. And so I don't know what was in these casks, but I wonder if it was just the straight up double pot stilled. You know, to add to that little bit of heft.
Well, I was turning my glass as I'm wont to do, and there's good beading on the glass. There's good legs. There's a good deal of oil in there. Across the palate, it's not hugely unctuous. It's pleasingly unctuous. There's no doubt about that.
Agreed.
And actually, I do wonder if there's a little bit of the column distilled spirit in here.
Potentially, yeah. So maybe that heft is just coming from the Oloroso cask plus.
Right.
There's two other cask types that you didn't mention. Do you want me to mention them?
I'd be very surprised if they stuck a bourbon cask in here.
So there's a bit of bourbon cask in there.
Okay. Wow, that Oloroso's doing the heavy lifting. Right, there's no doubt about that.
The other heavy lifting is from an ex-Muscatel cask.
I would not have guessed that. Okay.
But it's
I love that it's there. I absolutely. You and I were talking about today.
Yeah, Westland
right,
and
just this
Muscatel,
afternoon,
yeah.
right? Yep. That was our private conversation that I'm now sharing. But yeah, Muscatel can do wonderful things.
Absolutely wonderful things.
If you were to say a number, and obviously none of us understand how time works anymore, but if you were to give a number, how many years ago did you first hear of Muscatel in whiskey maturation?
In whiskey maturation? Oh, man.
How many years ago did you hear, people are sticking whiskey in Muscatel?
I would argue it was likely within the past 10 years, maybe even the past 6 to 8 years.
Fuck, I would even go 5 years, 4 years.
Yeah, it's early on it was bourbon, it was sherry. If they dug deeper, it was Oloroso and PX.
Right. Remember when the Aaron came out in Amontillado and everyone went
Amontillado like, what's that?
Who's doing Amontillado?
Of course, Glenmorangie had their...
Oh, I thought you were going to say Glenmorangie, because Glenmorangie's got all their funny little things going on. But
yeah, but I'm thinking some of the 90s wood finishes from Glenmorangie.
Right.
Where they kind of went outside the box a little bit. But yeah, Muscatel, that just wasn't a cask you heard of.
Right. It feels like 3 years ago, which means I might say 5 out loud.
And then meanwhile, name a whiskey matured in Muscatel that you didn't like.
Right.
Right?
Gosh, oh my gosh, I'm not even going to start a list. But yes, listen.
And then there was this one.
Listen.
And then there was this one.
A few moments ago you said, when you mentioned Jen from Spirit of Yorkshire.
Jenny. Yep.
And then you gave her last name.
Mellor.
And you said?
I hope I pronounced that right.
We got a text from Anna from Westland.
Anna Hines. Uh-oh, did I pronounce her name wrong? Is it Hins?
He just walked right into it.
Is it Hins?
Just walked right into it.
Heinz 57.
Anna texted,
All right.
"Good morning!" Exclamation point.
Okay, shit. I'm so sorry, Anna.
Just had to say I enjoyed the latest One Nation Under Whiskey episode during my morning miles. Let me just say, this came in at 10:55 a.m. on the East Coast. So Anna had put in miles and was able to text and had listened to our full episode by 7:55 a.m.
It's easy.
West
You're
Coast.
not up at 5 a.m. every day, Jason?
She says, "And cheers for the shout out." So well done to you. And I said that in the episode. Good job. Good job. You said the right names. Parenthetical comment.
Oh, here it is. It's Anna Hintz. Is it Anna Hintz?
It is, yeah.
Shut up. It's not Anna Hintz.
She says, "I'll also awkwardly say that my last name is pronounced more like Hintz than the ketchup. But no worries. It happens."
Anna.
Close parenthetical comment.
You know what? Good on her. Good on her for saying that. So many people say to my wife, they're like, "Okay, Heidi." And she's stopped saying things, and I'm the guy who's like, "Excuse me, it's Haida."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Tamara has not stopped correcting
Tamara
people.
hasn't said anything.
She has not.
Has Tammy said anything?
She's coming for you, bro. Anna continues. "And I was sipping on Waterford Gaia 2.1 for St. Patrick's Day. So delicious. Haven't had their peated offering yet, though, so I was intrigued to hear you talk about it." And then she closes by saying, "Congrats on the ROW release."
Ah, that's very nice.
And puts in the clapping hand emoji.
What's the clapping hand emoji look like? I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah, the two hands side by side with
Oh,
the
I
little
thought that was
triangles.
praying.
Oh, no, Joshua, we cannot describe emojis on the podcast.
Can we talk about the color
I'll
of this
show you
whiskey and what this emoji looks like?
Here, listen to this.
Yeah.
And so I said, as we're prone to, I did this in the last episode with the Anthony Levinson exchange. I said, "Good morning, Anna. Thanks so much for all your kind words. So sorry about the name. We'll issue an apology and I'll make fun of Joshua for having the confidence of a middle-aged white man. So win-win." To her great credit, she wrote, "Not necessary, but if it's an opportunity to tease him, ... And I said, "Always an opportunity to tease him." I never once said her last name on the last episode. I haven't even said her last name on this episode. And you have said it multiple times regardless.
I feel targeted.
Rightly so. So listen.
Yeah, go ahead.
We've got Anna talking about the Waterford Gaia and making reference to me talking about the Waterford Gaia. We got a question from Paul Marco
Oh, yeah.
into the info account.
Okay.
And he says, "Question for the podcast about Irish whiskey." Paul Marco writes, "Greetings, J&J Spirits." Isn't that lovely?
I do like that a lot.
That's
Yeah,
a-
it's not every... You know, most people just say SCN, Single Cast Nation, but J&J Spirits...
That's an excellent
hits home.
salutation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Long time, no write-in. I hope this email finds you well. It does, Paul. Thank you very much.
It does, yeah.
I was just listening to your latest episode, the one with Matt Hoffman. And Paul, Hoffman has one F, not two. And two N's.
Yeah,
Not
one
one.
F, two N's. And the interesting thing is, it's HONNMAF, Hoffman.
Wouldn't it be?
He doesn't even
That's
know
well
what to
done.
do
No, you
with
got
it.
that right. You absolutely
Yeah, I
got that
did.
right. Well done, you. Well done for thinking on the fly. Well done. Paul says, "And during your discussion in the intro, you mentioned that you usually get a prominent serial note when tasting Irish whiskey,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and that you feel this is a function of the malted and unmalted barley mash bill." I did. You agreed.
Yeah,
We're both in this together.
yeah.
Whenever I have this style of Irish whiskey, I always seem to get a prominent metallic note on the nose
Yep.
and palate. Do you get this note as well? If so, do you think the metallic note is also a function of the malted, unmalted mixture? Or is my brain wired in such a way that cereal just equals metallic? Thanks so much for the amazing spirits and excellent podcasting. Still looking forward to that upcoming worm tub episode, by the way. Winky face. Cheers, Paul. So there you go, Joshua. Is this metallic note that Paul Marco is experiencing cereal or something besides?
I don't know if it's cereal related. However, I thought that I mentioned it in that Matt Hoffman episode. Maybe I didn't. But when it comes to pot still whiskeys, I always get this coppery note. It's like sucking on a penny.
Yeah. I think I might have encouraged you to edit that out of the final.
Maybe you did. Maybe you did.
The final podcast.
You just didn't want me mentioning sucking on anything?
It was too real. Too real.
But yeah, look at that. Your glass is empty, Jason. Let's fix that.
Please. For the man who said I had too much.
Yeah, so hold on. So
it's the soundtrack for our day.
I love hearing that.
Cheers.
That you got it. That Paul is
Marco. I thought you were.
Do I have to name? Do you have to give him a full name check?
I just wanted you to say someone's name correctly.
Marco Paul.
Marco Polo.
Oh, Jason, don't you do that. Speaking of names, there's something I want to say afterwards. But listen, it's so nice to hear, Paul Marco, it's so nice to hear you say
Paul Marco.
That you get this. Paul Marco Polo. Paul Marco.
Stop it.
It's so nice to hear you say that you get this metallic note, because it was a note that I've always gotten. And I think, Jason, you may have mentioned it at one time.
Uh-huh.
You know, you and I have palates that click. And quite often, even if you're not using the words, I know how to decipher some of your words and sort of translate them into what my palate's doing and things like that. And so it's nice to hear someone whose palate I don't necessarily know say a similar thing. Yeah, that sort of metallic note coming through.
But here's the essential follow-up.
All right.
Is if we don't think the metallic means cereal, where is that metallic note coming from?
I've got no clue. I wouldn't necessarily say that I don't think it comes from cereal. All I would say is I don't know if it comes from cereal. However, the only place... Well, let me... Hold on. I'm sort of thinking aloud. The only place I've ever tasted it is within Irish whiskey. However, I've tasted it also in West Cork and Cooley, which is single malt.
So it's interesting that you do the single malt within Ireland, because I was going to say I do sometimes get that copper penny note in Scotch.
So where do you get? So that's a good thing, right? So now we're.
I don't think it's the mash bill.
All right. So where do you get that sucking a copper penny note in Scotch whiskey?
I sometimes wonder if it's from dried out casks. Is that the sound Scooby-Doo makes when Shaggy makes a good point?
Because it happens so rarely. Shaggy, even Scooby's got a...
Shaggy's full of good points. I will go to the death for that man. I wonder if it's an incomplete maturation that sometimes delivers that copper penny note to it, or even immature whiskey can sometimes have that copper note quality to it.
I get it in Redbreast 12.
Yeah.
Is 12-year-old whiskey immature?
I had this conversation with Ollie. He really likes Redbreast 12. He
As
thinks
he
the
should.
15 is better,
And I agree with him.
right? But he's a big fan of the 12, and there's not incomplete.
I don't think it's a bad
maturation
note.
happening there.
I don't think it's a bad note. I've just only experienced it, or at least acknowledged it within Irish whiskey.
Yeah, I just think if you took a Scotch whiskey and you put it in a really dried out sherry cask, you could get a copper penny note from it.
All right. Well, it's funny that you bring up Ollie's name. So I think if there's one person...
Should I get his name out of my mouth?
No, you keep his name in your mouth. I think if there's anyone I would trust to have knowledge with regards to, is that connected to a leaky cask or an emptier cask or whatever, like Ollie,
or a dried out
out cask. Thank you. I couldn't think of what you said, so I just started fucking saying shit.
Thank God one of us is here for precision.
Come again?
Moving on.
Yeah, but it would be Ollie. Ollie would be the one.
Right.
If he said, "Oh, it's because of X, Y, and Z," it's like Ollie said that, so it's X, Y, and Z.
Well, we have to get him back on soon because we want to talk about progress with Import na Trúin.
Yep.
And we want to talk about
Tormore as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We want to talk about what he's experiencing in the warehouse over there.
Oh, 100%.
God knows he's sitting alone in the Highlands so many nights that he can come on a podcast. We can have a chitty chatty with him.
Do you know how much Tormore he has?
I do. Are we revealing?
It's more Tormore.
Oh, painful. Here's another email. How are we doing on time?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't have my garage band running.
Oh, jeez, we're okay. We got a little time, but go ahead. Do your email, and there's something that I wanted to bring up.
All right.
And I think it's actually quite important. We should have brought this up a year and a half ago.
Oh, God. You say things like that and I have no idea what's going to come of it all. Okay, you ready for this email?
I was born ready.
Listen closely, Joshua.
I'm listening closely.
Even though your name isn't used at any point, I want you to listen closely.
I am listening closely.
Dear J, and J.
All right.
Yeah.
That's 3 J's.
This is March 25th. This is Christopher Hagen, maybe Hagen, Hagen. This is recent.
It's Hagen. Like as in Hagen does.
Confidence of a middle-aged white man.
What's his first name?
Christopher.
What is happening right now? It's Christopher Hagen.
Oh, Lord.
I want to say Hagen-Dazs.
God, he's so confident. He's so confident.
I can't do it, but go ahead.
Christopher,
ice cream.
let us know.
Christopher Hagen's, his new nickname is the Ice Cream Man. Go, what does the Ice Cream Man have to say?
I'm your ice cream man, stop me when I'm passing by. Oh my, I'm your ice cream man, stop me when I'm passing by.
He says, blind tasting featuring SCN. Dear JJ and J, I hosted a small blind tasting with my Scotch club last night, and 2 of your bottles were the most talked about of the night.
That's nice.
Parenthetical comment. I featured the Linkwood 12 refill sherry butt retail release and the Paul John 5. Close parenthetical comment.
Mm-hmm.
I figured the blind format would be great to eliminate any bias on the part of the group.
What was the first whiskey again? It was Paul John, and what was the other one?
Linkwood 12 refill sherry butt retail release.
Oh, wow, yes.
And then after eliminating any bias on the part of the group, he says lower age statements, world whiskey, etc. This is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I led with a Linkwood 25 G&M distiller labels bottling. Those can be cracking. G&M have also recently increased that ABV to 46%.
Lovely.
On the Distiller label series.
Yep.
Mwah. Big chef's kiss for that. I'm already buying some of them. I avoid them
Just because of the ABV.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm already returning to those labels. Actually, my first Linkwood that I ever had was on Rose Street in Edinburgh, and it was a Distillery labels bottling by Gordon MacPhail with the Golden Eagle on it. The Golden
15 or 25, do you remember?
I don't. Probably a 15, to be honest with you. But real cracking. Late 90s.
Sure. Yep.
Real. I like,
Sure, it's remarkable. Yeah.
Who's this distillery? This is remarkable. So, where were we? I led with a Linkwood 25 G&M Distiller labels bottling, and then slipped in your Linkwood 12 in the number 2 slot. People had no idea what it was, but they were raving. Such a great buttery nose and so much flavour with basically zero colour.
Mm-hmm.
What are we not?
Color guys.
What do we keep releasing?
Whiskey that may or may not have color to it.
No artificial colouring, just
no artificial color. Yeah,
just
that's
some real
really
deep
great.
reds coming out
Yep.
from us.
Yep.
But yeah, I love hearing that was well received, especially blind. Chris says, we then moved on to that boutique whiskey company Isla number 2 25 year, a signatory Clinlish 1996,
Checks out.
and wrapped up with your Paul John 5.
Ooh, wow, that's a great one to round it down on. Okay,
Right.
Yeah.
So you've gone Linkwood 25 G&M into Linkwood 12 SCN into that boutique whiskey company 25-year-old Isla into Signatory Clinlish 1996 into a 5-year-old going Paul John. Peated.
Peated.
Obviously.
Yep,
right?
makes sense.
Right, Scottish peated barley. Chris writes, the Paul John had the room imagining a small diner serving bacon and sunny side up eggs with a side of slightly burnt toast. People loved it.
Interesting.
That's so cool. So very, very cool. I'm just imagining a small diner serving bacon and sunny side up eggs with a side of slightly burnt toast.
God, I love that. It's so great that he did that blind.
Isn't that good?
Isn't that great?
He says, one funny note.
All right.
I thought there were lots of funny notes, but one funny note.
Okay.
After the second SCN bottle was revealed, I was jokingly accused of hosting some kind of SCN Amway party. For those,
Is that one of the pyramid scheme kind of things?
for
Okay.
those in other parts of the country, the idea is maybe like a Tupperware party,
yeah.
or an Ann Summers party. Oriflame was my mum's way back in the day.
What was it?
Oriflame, essentially just like all the rest. You would invite a bunch of friends over. You would get them in your house to sign order sheets that would pick up whatever it was you
And then
were
you
trying
get a
to sell to
discount
them.
on the stuff that you wanted.
And
from
then if one of
yeah.
them wanted to become a seller, then you would get blah, blah, blah. So
Pyramids.
there you go. So Chris says, I'll be patiently waiting for my commission to arrive in the mail. Hey, there's no crime against waiting.
There's no crime against waiting. Look at that. What a nice email from the... Oh, is there more?
A little bit more.
Oh, man.
But in all seriousness, I think SCN may have a few more converts in the Chicago area after last night. Keep up the great work, Chris.
So...
He didn't sign to the ice cream man, but
He
I
didn't
think
sign to the ice cream
he
man?
will in future.
Well, that's awesome. I will have to let Chris, the ice cream man, and others know when I'm in Chicago next. It's great to see another Chicago name. So hopefully we'll see him at a tasting there sometime soon.
That would be really cool. Yeah, we've got such wonderful supporters in the Chicago area that, yeah, I'd love to add them to that number.
So there's one last thing I wanted to add.
There's one last thing I wanted to add.
Fuck, you know. Go ahead.
This is a little bit more catching up. This is from February 24th of this year.
Do you have another email?
Just as a sentence. But the sign-off is so good because I was talking about Chris not signing the ice cream man because he hadn't received the nickname yet.
Okay.
I wanted to return you to Ryan Filey, who you'll remember as the Montana
Michelle
maltster.
Pfeiffer's, Michelle Pfeiffer. Yeah.
And on February 24, Ryan wrote in to say, "Wow, I just heard the latest episode. Thanks for mentioning our project. We look forward to contributing our small part to the whiskey world." And he signed it Ryan Pfeiffer, parentheses, not related to Michelle Pfeiffer.
So it's funny that you bring that up. I'm guessing we didn't record that. I do remember that email coming in.
Yeah, we never covered his return. You and I did talk about it. And he came with this photo, which is kind of his setup.
Oh, that's right. That's the Montana.
Right?
Yeah, moving to Montana.
There you go.
Yippee-yi-yi,
Overnight
yay.
sensation, my friend. I know that album intimately now.
Jason, tell the listeners about your experience with Overnight Sensation.
Oh, it would take far too long, but you and I discussed it privately off mic, and now my boys have got moving to Montana soon stuck in their heads. So if I could have done you any favors, it is that.
So this is the last thing that I want to say before we get out of here.
Yeah, all right, I'm with you.
You obviously know who Colin of the Pluralized Mares is. Of course you do, right? And you, of course, remember the name Cameron Taylor?
Of course.
Yeah. So Cameron Taylor and Colin of the Pluralized Mares
I'm with you.
got together and created a One Nation Down Under whiskey podcast. There's a little video here. You can see it here on the. It was in the One Nation Under Whiskey Facebook group. It was on. It was on Instagram as well, and it was basically Cameron. In my honest opinion, it was a 6 to 12 minute attempt. I don't know how long the video was. I was drinking at the time, Jason. It was a 6 to 27 minute long attempt for Cameron to gain his own nickname. And if I'm being honest, I had been toying with the idea of giving Cameron a nickname for perhaps the past 2 years. And I had one for him. I remember he posted something on Instagram and he mentioned something. I'm like, dude, have I got the nickname for you? And then I said I would record it, and then we never recorded it, and then I couldn't remember.
Oh my God, you should write everything down, Joshua.
But I think I've got one.
Okay.
You know I like to rhyme things, right?
Okay.
So first off, I know you're not on Instagram. A, you should be on Instagram. B, if you get back on Instagram, Cameron's
Discovering
what
Drams.
do they call that?
Handle,
yeah, is Discovering Drams.
I'm with you. I remember from back in the day.
I always wanted to say Discovering Yams. Like, how cool would it be if you're like just like a potato farmer and your handle was Discovering Yams? So I think we're just going to call Cameron Discovering Yams. That's his new nickname, Yams. You down with that?
Discovering Yams.
Discovering Yams.
That really works for me.
It's like a sweet potato.
There you go. Yams and the plural mares.
So there you go. We got Colin of the Pluralized Mares, and we got Yams, Discovering Yams. So there you go, Cameron.
Yams Taylor.
We got Colin of the Pluralized Mares, we have Discovering Yams, and we got the Ice Cream Man.
Oh, this has been a full episode.
It has been a full episode.
And I'm still I think we sometimes whisper this at the end of episodes, but I'm really hitting this Filey Bay hard.
Because it's phenomenal, right?
And this was Yorkshire Day release?
Yeah, Yorkshire every year. There's a Yorkshire Day, apparently.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And,
I thought every day was Yorkshire Day. Speak to folk from Yorkshire.
Every
day is Yorkshire Day.
Jason, it has been an absolute pleasure recording this episode with you. It was really a joy sitting down with you and with David Thompson.
That was a blast of an interview. Absolutely a blast.
It's one of those things where you talk to whiskey people all day long and you know how to talk to them.
Yeah.
You know the types of questions to ask them. When you're talking to someone whose life is agriculture, you're presented with the issue of not necessarily knowing the right question to be asking, and it was nice to be in that zone, to have a completely different kind of conversation.
But also how nice to run the Jim Swan thread through another conversation. Mm-hmm. You and I could record this podcast for another 30 years. We will never have Jim Swan on it. Mm-hmm. And that's tough to come to terms with. Mm-hmm. But as we keep talking to people who keep Jim's name alive, that means a lot to me.
Yeah, sure.
It means we're doing something right in this industry as well. Mm-hmm. So there you go. I don't want to get maudlin. I want to keep enjoying this whiskey, and
Jason,
we're gonna hit the stop button
and cracking your veneer right there.
You're gonna pour.
You're about to let an emotion out. What's going on?
You're gonna pour a little more whiskey for me, as we say. Where's your glass? You can't cheers without a glass. You numpty.
It's right here.
All right. To David.
To David.
Of course, to Jim. To Anna. To Trevor. Oh, gosh, Trevor from 2022.
Yeah. To the ice cream man.
To the ice cream man.
To Discovering Yams.
And to Paul Marco Polo.
To Paul Marco Polo. And, of course, Colin of the Pluralized Mares. Mm-hmm. We've mentioned him. Cheers.
Cheers.